Hello, everyone. Anna covered a bit there. I'm Carrie. We've done that. And it is great to be with you. So Anna said, I've been at KXE for about 8 years now, but they've never let me hold my own mic before. So this is kind of a big deal for me. When you give a prophetic word and they really grip onto it in case you're going to go rogue. Well, today is a free-for-all. So I'm going to be talking on new beginnings today, and I know what you're thinking. Original. It's January. But bear with me. You'll see how it goes. And first of all, I'm going to take you back to the end of 2015. So I had been dating Tommy, my now husband, for about 6 months. And I was going to visit his parents for the first time. Big moment. I actually knew, it was a bit cheating, because I knew his parents a bit already. I went to uni in the city that Tommy grew up in. Side note, we met then, and he doesn't remember. So that's a counselling session in the future. We'll talk about that. But I was friends with his sisters. Kate's up there somewhere. I'd been to his house for parties before. I wasn't totally stepping into the unknown, but I was still pretty nervous. It felt like a big moment. I remember, we drove up to his house, and I'm getting, the anxiety, the tummy, the butterflies. But I'd like to think I'll make a good first impression. Anna just said, I'm good with parents. And I thought, initially things seemed to be going all right. And then a couple of days in, I started to feel a bit uncomfortable in the bowel region. And I realised I hadn't gone for a number 2 yet. And I didn't think too much of it, because I thought, you know what, science, isn't it? What comes in must come out. It'll be fine. And, basic biology. It's only a matter of time. But then day 2 rolled into day 3, day 4. By day 5, things were starting very, very uncomfortable. And I was eating 3 meals a day plus snacks, but nothing was shifting. And I remember texting Anna about it, and we like to overshare, some would say. And she was like, Carrie, this is classic. This is anxiety. This is anxiety masquerading as constipation. She sent lots of encouraging poo emojis. It didn't help, weirdly. And it got to the point where I had to tell Tom, and I think he remembers this. I had to tell Tom because I was so bloated I couldn't do any of my trousers up. And then, classic, word got around his family. And his mum started slipping me dried apricots, and it was she was like, oh, to get things moving. It was, I wanted to die. It was horrific. But you were pleased to know the situation rectified itself somewhere around day 6. 3 years into marriage, I can use the toilet very freely at my in-laws' house, which is positive. But my point, somewhat tangentially, is that new beginnings can definitely bring anxiety. I said it was tangential. You've got to open with a poo story if you've got one. Anyway, you see, so I feel like there are 2 camps of people, right, when it comes to new beginnings. There are those people, they get really excited, right? We all know them. They get that fresh start feeling. They're buzzing for new opportunities, for what might be around the corner. And then there are those people, guess which one I am, who get a bit more anxious. Instead of opportunity, they see a blank void, they feel unsettled, there's a fear of the unknown there. They might get constipated, who knows? Maybe that's just me. And both, I think, can probably be fair reactions. But especially in light of all that's happened over the last couple of years, I just wonder how many of us are feeling some of that anxiety going into the next year. Things probably don't look like most of us hoped by now, right? Our family, like lots of others, just spent Christmas in isolation after catching COVID. Lots of us are working from home again. It feels like we're constantly waiting to hear if there's going to be another round of restrictions. And it just kind of feels like there's a very 2020 vibe about the whole thing. And it's been said a lot over the past couple of years, but we've been experiencing both a collective and a personal grief. Both the loss of loved ones, friends and family, but also life as it was before. And I know that many people in the KXE family have suffered hugely, and we can't underestimate the impact of that. But still, I think the new year offers a moment to pause, to reflect on and maybe even modify how we approach our circumstances. How do we let go of the fear that has arisen over the past couple of years and embrace a new level of faith and expectancy instead? I've never actually been one for resolutions. I've had a whole one, for the past 4 years. Those packet of herbs that you buy in the supermarket, like your basil, your coriander, you know the vibe. Every year, I say I'm going to freeze them instead of letting them die before I have a chance to use them. But every year, I remember we don't have a freezer. So you can imagine how well that one's going. But what I am going to suggest, not resolutions, is that we look at 3 steps or rhythms that we can introduce that will help transform us inwardly, draw us closer to Jesus, and live more closely in step with him. And they come in 3 little handy steps. So number 1 is look in. Remind ourselves of who God says we are. Then we look out. We live with our arms wide open. And we look up. We fix our eyes on Jesus. So I'll start with look in. And when I say this, I don't mean some kind of introspective, navel-gazing attempt to find some kind of inner peace or self-truth. What I mean is a decision to unearth a fresh revelation of who you are and who God says, who God calls you to be. And I can, I don't know how many of you have seen The Tourist. It's a new BBC drama. You can catch the whole thing when I play it. We love a Sunday night drama in our house. And I won't give too much away, but it opens with a car crash. And a man played by Jamie Dornan loses his memory. And then he spends the next 6 episodes trying to figure out who he is. Eventually he figures out his name, but that doesn't really tell him much. He relies on people who knew him in the past to tell him things about himself, but spoiler alert, they turn out to be largely unreliable, and he doesn't get very far in terms of self-discovery with them either. And I won't spoil the ending completely because it is worth a watch. But it's a really interesting portrayal of someone trying to figure out who they are, and what defines them. I could tell you a few things about myself right now. Anna did give me a little bio, but I'll go a bit further. My name's Carrie, obviously. I'm 30. My birthday's in June. I'm married to Tom. I'm a mum. Adrian Charles once referred to me as yet another underdressed Christian woman. And I really like peas. But none of that actually tells you much about me, does it? I doubt you feel as though you know me particularly well just from that. But the truest thing about me, about all of us, is that I'm loved. We are loved by God. We are created to demonstrate his glory. It's right there at the start of the Bible, right on the very first page. It says in Genesis 1, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. And the repetition here basically means we have to pay close attention. We are created to reflect the glory of the one who made us. And in Genesis 2, it gets more specific. It says, then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Now, this story of God breathing life into Adam and Eve, it would have landed really specifically with its original Jewish audience, probably in a different way than it does to most of us today. You see, there was this ritual in ancient Mesopotamia, and it stemmed from the belief that a statue was the real presence of the god it represented. And so during the ceremony, items would be placed in the temple. The last of it should be the idol itself. It would be placed at the very center, its mouth opened, and water poured in to represent that idol being breathed into life. This ceremony would have been at the forefront of the mind of those who heard the creation story in the ancient Jewish culture. So as God builds his temple, the earth, he places his final piece, Adam and Eve, at the center. And to a Jewish audience, this would have been evidence that we are made in God's image. We're designed for holiness. God breathed his life into each and every one of us. And we probably hear that a lot, right? But if you stop and you think about it, it is mind-blowing. And I actually remember when I understood something of this for the first time. My old church holds a course called Detox, and it's basically a chance to delve deeper into the truths of the Bible and learn to live them out. In the beginning of this course, we got given a postcard, and it had a bunch of stuff written on it, all different things from the Bible about what God says of us. And we read them all out together. That was kind of a little exercise that we did. We read them all out. They said things like, I am set apart, chosen by God. I am free. I am a daughter or a son of the Creator. And we were asked to choose 1 or 2 of them that stood out to us right at the start of the course, either because we didn't believe them, and we wanted to, or something that we just wanted to kind of grasp a little bit better. And for me, I chose, I am made new. I just didn't believe it, basically. I didn't believe that God would truly look past all my sins and all my failures. I called myself a Christian. I believed in redemption. I believed in Jesus. I believe he paid for my sins. But I didn't believe that God no longer saw them. I thought that they defined me. And I remember really clearly being asked what I thought God felt when he looked at me. And my first thought was disappointed. And I wish I could describe a light bulb moment when this kind of abounding love for me became amazingly clear, but I actually have the worst memory in the entire world. And if there was an epiphany, I do not remember it. But I do know that during the course, I do remember kind of developing this fresh understanding of it, how God calls me by name, how he's not disappointed in me, but he's proud. And that is true of every single one of us. And it's a game changer, when we see ourselves as God sees us, we become aware of our potential and we start to live more freely. In John 14, Jesus said that whoever believes in him would do greater things than he during his ministry. And with that truth under our belt, we can step into the new year confident that we've been anointed by God to be his hands and his feet. Which brings me on to number 2, but I'm just going to have some water. Very dry mouth. Anyone else? Just me? Okay, so the second one is look out. And there's a classic moment in the Gospels, and it's actually told in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And Jesus gets asked which of the commandments, the 10 commandments, is the most important. And he responds like this. The first is, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbour as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. I mean, it's pretty black and white, isn't it? Jesus can be more clear. Loving other people is a mark of the Christian faith. Living with arms wide open, welcoming the last, the least, and the lost is not optional for those of us who call ourselves followers of Christ. So this second rhythm is looking outwards, which I think starts with seeing others as God sees them, recognizing their intrinsic value and treating them in a way that reflects it. I'm sure many in the room will remember the heartbreaking death of Alan Kurdi, the 3-year-old Kurdish boy who tragically drowned while trying to cross the Mediterranean with his mum and his 5-year-old brother in September 2015. The devastating image of his lifeless body washed up on a Turkish beach made front pages everywhere. But it also resulted in a sea change in popular opinion regarding refugees. Immediately, kind of in the week following that image, NGOs reported an uptick in donations, like a significant increase in people parting with their cash. Google searches for Syria and refugees went massive. Even The Sun, the newspaper, which had previously referred to migrants as cockroaches, it started a fundraising campaign. This picture of Alan, it humanized a crisis that for many people seemed really distant. And it's horrific that it took such a tragic situation for many to recognize this, but I think it highlighted something of a deep truth that's actually built into our very beings, that each of us has an intrinsic value and are deserving of love, safety, and dignity. So how do we implement looking outwards into our daily lives? After God breathed his life into Adam and Eve, that verse we read earlier, revealing that each one of us is made in his image, created to flourish and to be in relationship with him, things start to go wrong. I mean, there's no surprise there. We see throughout Genesis that mankind finds this concept a pretty tough one to grasp. We see inequality marked out through the actions of individuals, families, communities, even civilizations. So then God calls out Abraham as the one to usher in his kingdom by pursuing righteousness and justice. In Genesis 18:19, it says, "For I have chosen him, so that he will direct his children and his household after him, to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." And then the Message version puts it like this: "I've settled on him, Abraham, as the one to train his children and future family to observe God's way of life, live kindly, generously, and fairly." And one image of what it looks like to look out, living in the way that God calls us to, extending kindness, generosity, hospitality to those around us. Not just those who look like, think like, act like us, but those people we find difficult, annoying, the ones we would, if we're honest, rather avoid. But as Christians, I just don't think we're given that option. We're told to live with open arms. That's the challenge we're given, and I think it starts with hospitality. The heart of the gospel is rooted in hospitality. God sending his son to die, to restore our relationship with him and make a way for us to be part of his kingdom, to feast at his table. By opening our homes if we're in a position to, or finding ways to welcome other people into our everyday lives, we imitate Jesus. Theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer referred to living out community in this way as not an ideal, but a divine reality. It might be messy, it's probably going to be uncomfortable, but that's what makes it beautiful. And I wish I could regale you with stories of how I live this out well myself, but the honest truth is I don't. I actually remember my mum inviting this older guy to Christmas one year. I think I was about 18. And this guy had nowhere to go, and to be honest, I thought it was clear why. I'm a horrible person. He spent a fair part of the day describing the shipping forecast in excruciating detail, being generally unbelievably boring, and a bit of a nuisance. I told you I was horrible. And I was miffed, little 18-year-old me, I was miffed that we had to work our day around him. We couldn't do the things we normally done on Christmas because it'd be awkward. We couldn't open our presents because he didn't have as many. And it was all just a bit, inconvenient to me. But my parents, who are far better humans than me, knew that extending hospitality can be difficult. It can be uncomfortable, but it is all the more beautiful for it. Rachel Held Evans wrote in her book, Searching for Sunday, "This is what God's kingdom is like. A bunch of outcasts and oddballs gathered at a table, not because they are rich or worthy or good, but because they are hungry, because they said yes, and there's always room for more." So if we want to bring God's kingdom to earth and point people to Jesus, that's what our own tables need to look like. We need to observe God's way of life, living kindly, generously, and fairly. So we've come to number 3, look up, fixing our eyes on Jesus. If we go back to the Genesis story, in chapter 3, we reach the low point. My Bible refers to it as the crafty snake, which I quite like. So Adam and Eve have until now been enjoying this intimate, beautiful relationship with God. They've been pottering about, naked and unashamed, having a lovely time. And then they get distracted, right? They choose to eat fruit from a tree that God has expressly forbade them from picking from. And immediately, this perfect relationship is just shattered. Adam and Eve suddenly realize that they're naked. They hide themselves from God, no longer wanting to be exposed in front of him. And it's the first recorded instance of shame in the human story. God's perfect plan for humanity is thrown off course. And that's the danger, I think, of forgetting to look up. When we get distracted, when we choose to invest more in other places than our relationship with God, we find ourselves out of step with his perfect plan. We're made for this relationship. When he breathed his life into us, he intended for our every breath to be filled with his Spirit. Here comes my Pete Hughes moment. I couldn't resist. The Hebrew word, thank you, I'm going to butcher it, used for breath in this context is ruach. Thank you. Which is also used to mean, so it means breath, sorry, but it's also used to mean life, spirit, and wind in different parts throughout the Old Testament. And the first time it's used is in the very first verse of the Bible. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit, Ruach, of God, was hovering over the waters. Then that same word is used when God breathes his life into mankind. There's a spiritual significance to our breath, to our breathing today, to that breath that he breathed into Adam and Eve. It's more than a simple in and out that we do without thinking. It connects us to our divine life source. He is present in every inhale and in every exhale. When we choose to make looking up to God, making space to meet with him a daily practice, we reconnect with him in a way that we were designed for. Hebrews 13 says this, "Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." Which makes it sound pretty simple, right? It's like, just fix your eyes on Jesus, guys. Job done. But in some ways, I kind of reckon this actually is the straightforward one. There are practical, uncomplicated steps we can take that set us on the right path to keeping our focus on God and following the way of Jesus. I'll start by saying, honestly, I found this talk really difficult to write, and especially this bit. I gave birth to a beautiful little boy last year, Remy Mac. He's down here, rolling around on the floor. He's 10 months old now. I had these visions of maternity leave being time to, rest in God's presence, read my Bible during nap time, and become this kind of wonderful, ethereal, spirit-filled mother. The reality, you might have realized by now, has not quite hit the mark. It's actually been a really hard year for me in terms of faith. That my son arrived safely and well is a literal miracle, which is a story for another time. But I've never felt so sure of God's goodness than when I look at him. But he's also carnage. And I found it very difficult, to stoke the embers of my faith over the past year. But I wonder how many of you can relate. We've all got our stuff. Whether it's family, friends, or relationship work, we've all got stuff competing for our time, for our attention. So how do we persevere in living in a way that will see us drawing closer to Jesus and becoming more like him? Which is where I come in with a plug. So at KXC, we're encouraged to join a pattern. It means getting together in groups of 3 or 4 to encourage each other in living out our faith by following simple patterns or rhythms that help us to become with Jesus. Be with Jesus. I really should know this. Be with Jesus, become like him, and do the things he did. Thanks. Essentially committing to ways to look up each day. Hey, Rams. So this can look like all sorts of things. You've got your classics, you've got your Bible study, you've got your memorizing scripture, you're practicing the Sabbath, that kind of thing. Bread was mentioned earlier during the notices. That's a really accessible way to start reading the Bible every single day. Then there are ways to pursue generosity, simplicity, thanksgiving, or step out in praying for healing or practicing the gift of prophecy. I've named a few there, but honestly, I've not even scratched the surface. Because it's so easy, right, to fall into unhealthy practices. I don't know how many of you can relate, but over the past couple of years, we have fallen into a really unhealthy habit of watching telly every single night. A combination of the pandemic, a new baby. We've kind of been at home a whole lot more than we're used to being, as most people have. And we just sort of slid into this rhythm without even really meaning to. But even this week, I've been sitting down to think about this talk. First time I've engaged my brain in a year. In the evenings, and Tom is a lot more disciplined than me anyway, so he's been reading instead of, blindly reaching for the remote. And it has been so refreshing. I think it can be really helpful to be deliberate in naming a few rhythms we want to practice, sharing them with a couple of close friends, encouraging each other along the way. That accountability is really helpful, and daily practices can make a massive, massive difference in our walk with God. Everything flows from this as well, right? So we're reminded of who God says that we are and encouraged to open up our lives to others when we look to Jesus first. We can't do any of that without first drawing close to him. So if you're not yet in a pattern, I'd really recommend it as a simple way to not only build community, but by faithfully committing to these practices, we're more present to Jesus. And we invite the Holy Spirit to do his work in us every single day. I've been in a pattern with a couple of friends for almost 6 years now. Shout out to Lauren in the second row. We've seen each other through a lot in that time. And I'll be honest, there are times when we have instilled these practices slightly more successfully than others. But I can say it's consistently played a huge role in encouraging me in my faith and in helping me to pursue Jesus. And the thing with this is that it's pretty straightforward, right? But there aren't any shortcuts. If we want to fix our eyes on Jesus, keep God at the center, it takes effort. It's like any relationship. If we want to get to know someone well, we have to put the time in. We live on the 4th floor of a building, and there are 67 steps up to our front door, to be exact. And I can tell immediately when Tom is in the building, right from when you hear the bottom door slam. See, he's not light on his feet, bless him, which helps. But it's because I know him so well that I can tell when it's his footsteps. When it gets to kind of 5:30 p.m. and me and Remy, we are flagging. And we play a game called Daddy or Not Daddy. And I've not been wrong yet. Didn't say it was a good game, but, we run out of things. By 5:30, we're at a low point. But that kind of intimacy, it comes with time. And it's the same with God, obviously. To get to know him, to be captivated by him, it takes intentionally setting apart space to cultivate that relationship, to cultivate that closeness. And I can't think of a better way to step into this new year, embracing it as an opportunity to raise our faith, grow in our love for other people, pointing them to Jesus and drawing closer to the one who made us. And on that note, I would love to pray.